From Val Kilmer's ironic mask moment to a TV version so butchered the director disowned it with a fake name, Heat's production was filled with bizarre incidents that rivaled the movie's own drama. Real criminals studied it like a training manual, Marines use it to teach reload techniques, and one actor became so synonymous with his villainous role that prison inmates called him by his character's name for years. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Heat, 1995. Fact 1. Kilmer's too talented for masks. Irony. Val Kilmer's experience on the Heat set produced one of the most perfectly timed moments of irony in Hollywood history, and it happened completely by accident. During the filming of the opening armored car heist scene in 1995, Kilmer found himself in conversation with his co-star Danny Trejo between takes. The two actors were preparing for one of the most intense robbery sequences ever put on film, where Kilmer's character Chris Sheherless and the rest of Neil McCauley's crew would execute a meticulously planned heist while wearing ski masks to conceal their identities. As they waited for the cameras to roll, Kilmer began telling Trejo about a recent career decision that had been weighing on his mind. Warner Brothers had just offered him a staggering $40 million to reprise his role as Batman in another film, following his appearance in Batman Forever earlier that same year. However, Kilmer had turned down this enormous payday, and he was eager to explain his reasoning to his fellow actor. "I'm too talented to wear a mask," Kilmer declared to Trejo, expressing his frustration with playing a character whose face would be hidden behind the iconic Batman cowl for much of the performance. He felt that covering his face limited his ability to showcase his acting skills and connect with audiences through facial expressions and emotional nuance. For an actor who prided himself on his craft, the idea of being reduced to a voice behind a mask felt like a creative constraint he was no longer willing to accept, even for such an incredible sum of money. The universe, however, had a sense of humor about Kilmer's declaration. At the exact moment he finished explaining why he was too talented to wear a mask, a production assistant appeared at his side with perfect timing. "Here you go, Val," the assistant said cheerfully, extending a white ski mask toward the actor. This was the very mask Kilmer would need to wear for the heist sequence they were about to film. According to Trejo's recollection of this moment, Kilmer looked down at the ski mask in the assistant's hand, then back up with the expression of complete defeat. "I'm sick of this," he said, the irony of the situation clearly not lost on him, as he prepared to don yet another face covering for his art. Fact 2. Pacino played a secret cocaine addict. Al Pacino made a fascinating creative decision while preparing for his role as Lieutenant Vincent Hanna in Heat, one that remained completely hidden from audiences until years after the film's release. In 2016, more than 20 years after the movie came out, Pacino revealed during interviews that he had secretly played his character as a cocaine addict throughout the entire film, even though this aspect of Hanna's personality never made it into the final version that audiences saw in theaters. The backstory to this hidden character choice traces back to Michael Mann's original screenplay drafts. In the early versions of the Heat script, Vincent Hanna was written as a detective struggling with a serious cocaine habit, which would have provided a clear explanation for his erratic behavior, explosive temper, and the manic energy that drives him obsessively in his pursuit of Neil McCauley's crew. However, as Mann continued refining the screenplay through multiple rewrites, he ultimately decided to remove all direct references to Hanna's drug use from the dialogue and action. Despite this change in the script, Pacino made the deliberate choice to continue playing Hanna as if the cocaine addiction was still very much a part of the character's reality. He believed that this hidden struggle would inform every aspect of his performance, from the way Hanna moved and spoke to the intensity of his emotional outbursts. Pacino has explained that he felt this invisible addiction was the key to understanding why Hanna behaves so erratically throughout the film, particularly during his famous confrontational scenes where he explodes with seemingly disproportionate anger. This secret character motivation helps explain some of Hanna's most memorable moments in the film, including his volatile interactions with his wife Justine and his aggressive interrogation techniques with suspects. Pacino's decision to maintain this internal character background, even without any script support, demonstrates the depth of preparation that went into creating one of cinema's most intense police detective characters. The audience never sees Hanna using drugs or even references to substance abuse, but Pacino's performance carries the weight of this hidden addiction in every scene, creating a layer of complexity that viewers can sense without fully understanding its source. Fact 3. Marine Corps uses Heat as training. The United States Marine Corps has been using a specific scene from Heat as an official training tool for new recruits, turning Val Kilmer's performance into an unexpected educational resource for America's military. During the climactic bank robbery shootout sequence, there's a moment where Kilmer's character Chris Sheherlis runs out of ammunition in his rifle and performs an incredibly fast magazine reload while under intense police fire. This single moment of action filmmaking became so impressive to military experts that it found its way into actual combat training programs. The reload technique that Kilmer demonstrates in the film represents textbook perfect form for changing magazines during a firefight. His movements are fluid, efficient, and exactly what military instructors want their recruits to learn when it comes to maintaining their weapons under pressure. The way Kilmer handles the rifle, ejects the empty magazine, inserts the fresh one, and gets back into firing position follows proper military protocol so precisely that it could have been lifted directly from a training manual. What makes this even more remarkable is the extensive preparation that went into creating this moment. Val Kilmer spent months training with former Special Air Service members who served as technical advisors on the film, practicing his reload technique over and over until it became second nature. The ex-military consultants worked with all the actors to ensure their weapons handling looked authentic, but Kilmer's dedication to perfecting this particular skill paid off in ways no one could have predicted. Marine Corps instructors at recruit training facilities have incorporated footage of Kilmer's reload into their weapons training curriculum, showing the clip to new Marines as an example of how quickly and smoothly a magazine change should be performed in combat situations. The instructors reportedly tell their recruits, "If you can't change a clip as fast as this actor, get out of my army," using Kilmer's Hollywood performance as the gold standard for real military proficiency. This crossover from entertainment to military education demonstrates just how realistic and technically accurate Heat's action sequences were, thanks to the extensive military consultation that went into the film's production. The fact that a fictional bank robber's reload technique became a teaching tool for actual Marines speaks to the level of authenticity that Michael Mann and his team achieved in creating their crime thriller. Fact 4. Kevin Gage became Waingro in prison. Kevin Gage discovered just how memorable his villainous performance in Heat had been when he found himself serving a 2-year prison sentence starting in 2003, 8 years after the film's release. Throughout his entire incarceration, Gage experienced something that most actors never have to deal with: being completely identified with their most notorious character by everyone around them, including both fellow inmates and the prison staff who were supposed to be maintaining professional boundaries. In Heat, Gage played Waingro, one of the most despicable characters in the entire film and arguably one of cinema's most hateable villains. Waingro is a loose cannon who joins Neil McCauley's crew for the opening armored car robbery, but immediately proves himself to be a psychotic liability. He kills a security guard unnecessarily during what should have been a clean heist, nearly destroys the entire operation, and later becomes a dangerous enemy who betrays the crew to their rivals. The character is written and performed as someone with absolutely no redeeming qualities, making him the perfect antagonist that audiences love to hate. When Gage entered the prison system, he quickly learned that Heat had achieved legendary status among both inmates and guards. The film's realistic portrayal of professional criminals and its authentic depiction of the criminal underworld had made it required viewing for many people within the prison environment. As a result, virtually everyone Gage encountered during his incarceration immediately recognized him as the actor who had brought Waingro to life on screen. Rather than calling him by his real name, Kevin Gage, both prisoners and prison guards universally addressed him as Waingro throughout his entire 2-year sentence. This wasn't just an occasional nickname or joke that some people used. It became his primary identity within the prison walls. Whether he was dealing with correctional officers during official business or interacting with other inmates during daily activities, everyone consistently referred to him by his character's name rather than his actual identity. This complete identification with his fictional character demonstrates the lasting impact that Heat had on audiences, particularly those within the criminal justice system who could relate to the film's realistic portrayal of crime and law enforcement. For Gage, it meant that his most famous role followed him into one of the most challenging periods of his real life. Fact 5. Director disowned TV version with fake name. Michael Mann became so furious with how NBC butchered his carefully crafted film for television that he took the extremely rare step of removing his name from the project entirely, replacing it with Alan Smithy. the official Hollywood pseudonym used when directors want to completely disown their work. This dramatic move came after a bitter dispute over how much of Heat would be cut to fit into a television time slot, resulting in one of the most famous examples of a director rejecting a TV edit of their own movie. When NBC acquired the rights to broadcast Heat on television in 1999, Mann initially tried to work with the network to preserve the integrity of his nearly 3-hour epic. Understanding that some editing would be necessary for television, Mann actually offered NBC additional footage that had been cut from the original theatrical release, hoping to create a 4-hour television event that could be shown over 2 nights. This extended version would have included more character development scenes and additional material that Mann felt would work well in a television format with commercial breaks. However, NBC had different plans entirely. Instead of embracing Mann's vision for a longer television version, the network decided they wanted to squeeze Heat into a single 3-hour time slot, including commercials. This meant that nearly 40 minutes of content had to be removed from the original 2-hour and 52-minute theatrical cut. Mann watched in horror as NBC editors sliced away crucial scenes that he believed were essential to the film's narrative structure and character development. The cuts were so extensive and damaging to the story that Mann felt the resulting television version no longer represented his artistic vision in any meaningful way. In his words to Variety, NBC had cut so much out of the movie that they destroyed the narrative of the film along with its integrity. Mann explained that too much time was taken out of scenes that weren't removed for content reasons, but simply to make room for more commercial breaks. When NBC offered a compromise to restore only 17 minutes of footage, Mann sarcastically responded that they could call it a Michael Smithy or an Alan Mann movie, making it clear that he would not allow his real name to be associated with what he considered a mangled version of his masterpiece. Fact 6. Real criminals used it as training manual. 2 real-life bank robbers took their inspiration directly from Heat, studying the film so intensively that they essentially used it as a criminal training manual before attempting their own version of the movie's climactic bank heist. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matassariano became so obsessed with Michael Mann's realistic portrayal of professional criminals that when police searched Phillips's residence after their deadly 1997 robbery attempt, they discovered a copy of Heat still sitting in his VCR player, providing clear evidence of how deeply the film had influenced their criminal planning. The 2 men had watched Heat repeatedly, analyzing every detail of how Neil McCauley's crew executed their bank robbery and the subsequent shootout with police. They paid particular attention to the weapons used, the body armor worn, the tactical movements during the gunfight, and even the way the criminals communicated with each other under fire. Phillips and Matassariano became convinced that they could replicate the film's heist in real life, apparently believing they could achieve the same level of professional competence as the fictional characters they admired. On February 28, 1997, the 2 men walked into a Bank of America branch in North Hollywood, California, armed with modified automatic rifles and wearing heavy body armor that closely resembled the equipment used in Heat. When police arrived and confronted them as they exited the bank, the resulting shootout lasted an incredible 44 minutes and became one of the longest and most violent gunfights between criminals and law enforcement in American history. The similarities between their real-life crime and the fictional heist were immediately obvious to responding officers. The robbers used the same tactics they had seen in the movie, including providing covering fire for each other, using automatic weapons to suppress police response, and attempting to fight their way out of the area while heavily armed and armored. The parallels were so striking that police officers on the scene later compared the encounter directly to Mann's film. Both criminals were ultimately killed in the shootout, while 12 police officers and 8 civilians were injured during the prolonged battle. The incident forever changed police tactics and equipment across the United States, as law enforcement agencies realized they needed better weapons and armor to deal with criminals who had studied military-style tactics from movies like Heat. Fact 7. Keanu Reeves was originally cast. Keanu Reeves was actually signed on to play Chris Shiherlis, the role that eventually became one of Val Kilmer's most memorable performances, but a last-minute scheduling change completely altered the casting of this crucial character. The switch happened so late in the pre-production process that Reeves had already been officially cast and was preparing for the role when circumstances suddenly shifted in a way that allowed the filmmakers to pursue their original first choice for the part. Val Kilmer had always been Michael Mann's preferred actor for the role of Chris Shiherlis, the skilled but emotionally volatile member of Neil McCauley's robbery crew. However, when Mann was putting together his cast in the early stages of production, Kilmer appeared to be completely unavailable due to his commitment to star as Batman in the upcoming Batman Forever. This superhero sequel was scheduled to film during the same period as Heat, creating what seemed like an impossible scheduling conflict that would prevent Kilmer from joining Mann's ensemble cast. Faced with Kilmer's apparent unavailability, Mann and his casting team turned to Keanu Reeves as their backup choice for the role. Reeves was riding high on his success from films like Point Break and Speed, making him an attractive option for the part of the troubled criminal who struggles to balance his dangerous profession with his relationship with his wife Charlene. The casting team felt confident that Reeves could bring the right combination of intensity and vulnerability to the character, and he was officially brought aboard the project. However, Hollywood's scheduling is notoriously unpredictable, and Batman Forever's production timeline shifted in ways that nobody had anticipated. When Kilmer's schedule unexpectedly opened up and he became available for Heat after all, Mann immediately jumped at the opportunity to cast his original first choice. This sudden availability meant that Reeves had to be released from the project, despite already being attached to play Chris Shiherlis. The timing of this switch was so tight that it demonstrates just how fluid casting decisions can be even in major Hollywood productions. Reeves graciously stepped aside, allowing Kilmer to step into the role that would become integral to Heat's success and showcase some of the most realistic weapons handling and reload techniques ever captured on film. Fact 8. Jon Bon Jovi auditioned. Jon Bon Jovi, the lead singer of one of the biggest rock bands of the 1980s and 90s, threw his hat into the ring for a role in Heat during the film's casting process, though exactly which character he was hoping to play remains a mystery that has never been publicly revealed. The rock star's audition represents one of those fascinating Hollywood what-if moments where a major celebrity from the music world attempted to cross over into serious dramatic filmmaking with one of the most respected crime directors of the era. By 1994, when Heat was in pre-production, Bon Jovi had already established himself as a global superstar with hits like Livin' on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name, but he was also beginning to explore acting opportunities beyond his music career. The early 90s had seen several rock stars successfully transition into acting roles, and Bon Jovi was clearly interested in testing whether his charisma and stage presence could translate to the big screen in a serious dramatic context. Michael Mann's casting process for Heat was notably thorough and competitive, as the director was assembling what would become one of the most impressive ensemble casts of the decade. With major roles going to established acting heavyweights like Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and Val Kilmer, the film also featured numerous supporting characters that required skilled performers who could hold their own alongside these legendary actors. The fact that Bon Jovi felt confident enough to audition suggests he was genuinely serious about pursuing acting as more than just a casual side project. Unfortunately for the rock star, his audition did not result in a role in the final film. The specific reasons why he wasn't cast have never been made public, and it's unclear whether he was competing for one of the major supporting roles, or perhaps a smaller part that might have showcased his potential as an actor. The casting directors and Michael Mann ultimately went with other actors for all the roles in the film, leaving Bon Jovi to continue focusing on his music career while occasionally taking on acting projects in other films and television shows throughout the following decades. Fact 9. Actors trained with real criminals at Folsom. Michael Mann took his commitment to authenticity so seriously during the preparation for Heat that he personally escorted Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, and Tom Sizemore on a field trip to one of America's most notorious maximum security prisons to conduct face-to-face interviews with actual career criminals. This extraordinary research method involved bringing 3 of Hollywood's biggest stars directly into Folsom State Prison, where they could study the mannerisms, speech patterns, and psychological profiles of real professional thieves who had lived the lives their characters would be portraying on screen. Folsom State Prison, located in California, has housed some of the most dangerous and sophisticated criminals in the American prison system since it opened in 1880. The facility was chosen specifically because it contained inmates who had been convicted of the types of high-level crimes that Neil McCauley's crew specializes in throughout Heat. Mann wanted his actors to understand not just the technical aspects of being a professional criminal, but also the mindset, the emotional detachment, and the specific ways that career thieves think about their work and their relationships. During these prison interviews, the actors had the opportunity to ask questions about everything from the practical details of planning heists to the psychological toll of living a life constantly on the run from law enforcement. The inmates shared insights about the discipline required to be successful in high-stakes robbery, the way criminals compartmentalize their emotions to avoid getting attached to anything that might compromise their escape plans, and the particular code of conduct that exists among professional thieves who take pride in their work. This direct exposure to real criminals provided the actors with invaluable material that they could incorporate into their performances. The conversations helped them understand the subtle differences between movie criminals and actual ones, allowing them to bring a level of authenticity to their roles that would have been impossible to achieve through traditional acting preparation alone. The prison visits were part of Mann's broader strategy of using real-world research to inform every aspect of the film, ensuring that Heat would feel genuine, rather than like a typical Hollywood fantasy about crime and law enforcement. Fact 10. Live gunfire recorded for authenticity. Michael Mann made the extraordinary decision to record actual gunfire during the filming of Heat's climactic shootout sequence, rejecting the standard Hollywood practice of adding sound effects in post-production in favor of capturing the real acoustic experience of a massive gunfight on the streets of downtown Los Angeles. This commitment to audio authenticity required Mann's sound team to strategically place microphones throughout the filming location to capture every gunshot as it happened, creating one of the most realistic-sounding action sequences ever put on film. The technical challenge of recording live gunfire during filming was immense, requiring careful coordination between the sound department, the actors, and the weapons specialists who were managing the enormous amount of ammunition being fired during each take. Mann's crew had to position sensitive recording equipment in locations where it could capture the gunshots without being damaged by the concussive force of the weapons or the blank rounds being fired by the actors. The microphones needed to be close enough to pick up the authentic sound of each weapon, but far enough away to avoid being destroyed by the intensity of the gunfight. The sheer volume of ammunition used during the filming was staggering, with each complete take of the shootout sequence requiring between 800 and 1,000 rounds of blank ammunition. This massive expenditure of blanks was necessary because Mann wanted to film the entire sequence in long, continuous takes that would capture the chaos and intensity of a real street battle. Rather than cutting the scene into smaller pieces and adding sound effects later, he chose to let the cameras roll and the guns fire until each take was complete. The result of this labor-intensive approach was a gunfight that sounds completely different from typical movie shootouts. The authentic recording captured not just the individual gunshots, but also the way the sounds echoed off the buildings in downtown Los Angeles, the overlapping noise of multiple weapons firing simultaneously, and the subtle audio details that make the difference between movie gunfire and the real thing. This attention to sonic authenticity helped make Heat's shootout sequence so realistic that it has been used as a training tool by actual law enforcement and military organizations who recognize its accuracy in depicting the audio experience of urban combat. Fact 12. Only weekend shootout filming allowed. The massive bank robbery shootout sequence that serves as Heat's climactic action scene was so loud, disruptive, and potentially dangerous that Los Angeles city officials would only permit Michael Mann and his crew to film it on weekends, creating a logistical nightmare that stretched what should have been a few days of shooting into many weeks of weekend-only production work. This unusual filming restriction meant that Mann had to completely restructure his shooting schedule around the limitations imposed by the city, forcing him to film one of the most important sequences in his movie in small chunks spread across multiple weekends. The sequence involves a prolonged gunfight through the streets of downtown Los Angeles, with hundreds of blank rounds being fired, police cars racing through intersections, and explosions that could be heard for blocks in every direction. City officials were understandably concerned about the impact this level of noise and activity would have on the normal business operations of downtown Los Angeles during weekdays, when thousands of people work in the office buildings surrounding the filming locations. The sounds of automatic weapons fire, even from blanks, combined with the sight of actors in tactical gear running through the streets, could easily cause panic among people who might mistake the filming for an actual terrorist attack or crime in progress. The weekend-only restriction created enormous challenges for Mann, who had originally planned to film the entire shootout sequence in a concentrated period of time to maintain the energy and continuity that such an intense action sequence requires. Instead, He was forced to break the sequence into smaller segments that could be completed during Saturday and Sunday filming sessions, then wait until the following weekend to continue with the next portion of the gunfight. This stop-and-start approach made it much more difficult to maintain the momentum and intensity that the scene needed to work effectively. Despite these logistical hurdles, Mann and his crew managed to create one of the most realistic and visceral action sequences ever captured on film. The weekend filming schedule actually allowed the actors more time to prepare between shooting sessions, giving them additional opportunities to practice their weapons handling and coordinate their movements. The extended production timeline also meant that Mann could review footage from each weekend's work and make adjustments to improve subsequent portions of the sequence. Fact 13. Moby replaced original score. Elliot Goldenthal spent considerable time and effort composing original music specifically for Heat's emotionally powerful final scene, where Vincent Hanna holds the dying Neil McCauley's hand at the end of their fatal confrontation, only to have Michael Mann decide during the editing process that a completely different piece of music would better serve the moment. Instead of using Goldenthal's custom-written score, Mann chose to license "God Moving Over the Face of the Waters" by electronic music artist Moby, fundamentally changing the emotional tone and impact of the film's conclusion. Goldenthal, who had composed the entire musical score for Heat, had created what he believed was a fitting piece of music to accompany the film's climactic moment of connection between the two main characters. The composer understood the significance of this scene within the broader narrative and had crafted his music to enhance the complex emotions of respect, understanding, and tragedy that define the relationship between the detective and the criminal he has been pursuing throughout the entire film. However, when Mann was in the editing room putting together the final cut of Heat, he discovered that Moby's atmospheric electronic composition created a different kind of emotional resonance that he felt was more appropriate for the scene. God Moving Over the Face of the Waters has a haunting, ethereal quality that emphasizes the spiritual and almost mystical connection between Hanna and McCauley in their final moments together, rather than focusing on the more traditional dramatic orchestration that Goldenthal had provided. Rather than letting his unused composition go to waste, Goldenthal found a creative solution that allowed his work to still reach audiences, though in a completely different context. He took the music he had originally written for Heat's ending and repurposed it for another major film project he was working on around the same time. The composition became part of the score for Michael Collins, the biographical drama about the Irish revolutionary leader, though Goldenthal made some modifications to better fit the new film's Irish setting, including replacing the electric guitar elements with a traditional fiddle to match the cultural context of the story about Ireland's struggle for independence. Fact 14. Real McCauley meeting-inspired coffee scene. The iconic coffee shop conversation between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro's characters was directly inspired by an actual meeting that took place between Chicago detective Chuck Adamson and the real criminal Neil McCauley, whose cat-and-mouse relationship formed the foundation for Michael Mann's entire screenplay. This extraordinary real-life encounter between a dedicated police officer and the professional thief he was pursuing created one of the most compelling and authentic moments in crime cinema history, because it was based on something that had genuinely happened between two men who found themselves on opposite sides of the law. Chuck Adamson, who later became a friend and collaborator of Michael Mann's, had been tracking the real Neil McCauley through Chicago's criminal underworld during the early 1960s. McCauley was a highly skilled professional thief who specialized in sophisticated heists and had spent much of his adult life either committing crimes or serving time in prison, including several years in the notorious Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Adamson was a relentless detective who had made it his personal mission to catch McCauley and put an end to his criminal career. The actual meeting between Adamson and McCauley happened under circumstances that were remarkably similar to what audiences see in Heat's famous diner scene. The two men encountered each other in a public setting and, instead of immediately engaging in confrontation or arrest, they found themselves sitting down together for what turned into an unexpectedly intimate and philosophical conversation about their respective roles in life. According to Mann's recollections of Adamson's stories, both men were going through personal crises at the time, which led them to open up to each other in ways that neither had anticipated. During this real conversation, Adamson and McCauley developed a grudging mutual respect despite being natural enemies. They discussed their dedication to their respective professions, the sacrifices they had made in their personal lives, and the strange parallel paths that had brought them into conflict with each other. Both men acknowledged that their relationship would ultimately end with one of them destroying the other. But they also recognized something of themselves in their opponent. This profound moment of human connection between adversaries became the emotional and thematic heart of Heat's screenplay. Fact 15. 65 locations. 0 soundstages. Michael Mann made the unprecedented decision to film Heat entirely on location throughout Los Angeles, using 65 different real places over the course of 107 days of shooting without ever setting foot inside a traditional movie studio soundstage. This commitment to authentic locations was so extreme that Mann specifically instructed his location scouts to find places that had never been featured in movies before, ensuring that audiences would see a version of Los Angeles that felt completely fresh and unexplored on screen. Most major Hollywood productions rely heavily on soundstages, which are large indoor spaces where filmmakers can build sets, control lighting and sound conditions, and avoid the complications that come with filming in real-world locations. Soundstages offer directors complete control over their environment, protection from weather and noise, and the ability to modify or rebuild sets as needed. However, Mann believed that this level of control would actually work against Heat's goal of feeling authentic and realistic, so he chose to embrace all the challenges that come with location shooting. Mann's location manager, Janice Polly, who had previously worked with the director on The Last of the Mohicans, was tasked with finding dozens of Los Angeles locations that could serve the story while also meeting Mann's requirement that they be cinematically virgin territory. This meant avoiding the usual Hollywood locations that audiences might recognize from other films, instead seeking out places that would feel completely natural and unfiltered to viewers. The location team ultimately found that fewer than 10 of their 65 chosen locations had ever appeared in previous movies. This approach created enormous logistical challenges for the production team, who had to coordinate filming schedules around the normal operations of real businesses, deal with unpredictable lighting and weather conditions, and transport all their equipment between dozens of different locations across the sprawling Los Angeles metropolitan area. The crew had to adapt to whatever conditions they found at each location, rather than building environments to suit their specific needs. The decision to shoot entirely on location contributed significantly to Heat's distinctive visual style and authentic atmosphere. Every interior and exterior in the film carries the genuine texture and detail of real places where people actually live and work, rather than the artificial perfection of constructed movie sets.